as you guys have been hearing their stories, reflecting on your own journeys, kind of want to go into dialogue mode and just hear what's been arising and what you're feeling, and no rules, just what's up. So does anybody have any sort of pressing alive curiosities? Michael?
I'm curious about Eldrick and Jesse. The first one was you talked about your 7-year-old, and then you started to express this sense of shame. And then you talked about this little boy that was trying to protect his sister. And then you also we're talking about self-sacrifice, and it was almost like a bad thing, the way I interpreted that little boy did. And that Eldrick kind of had the 7-year-old was operating, and it was I'm almost wondering, what would you tell those younger parts of you right now, if they're right in front of you?
What would I tell my 7-year-old? A lot. But the first thing I would tell him is that it was not his fault, and I would let him know that there was nothing wrong with him, and I would let him know that it's okay to love, because that 7-year-old made a decision that caring for somebody else and loving somebody else put him in a position to be harmed. I submitted to molestation, to, once again, self-sacrifice, under the threat of my younger sister being harmed, who was 4 years my junior. So I'm 7 protecting my 3-year-old sister, and I'm like, okay, do what you will. And as a result of that, because I loved her, because I cared about her, I was put in a position, or at least that's the story that I told myself, I was put in a position to be hurt. And because I loved her, that made me weak. And so at that critical point in my life, in my development, loving somebody and giving a damn about somebody was a sin. So that's how I functioned, and that's how I operated for the lion's share of my life. I don't give a fuck about you. If it's gonna be me or you, it's gonna be you. And that's how I lived.
How would you tell him to love?
Be open. I shut down. I became a machine at 7 years old. Be open. Feel. I stopped feeling. I didn't feel anything. I used to get my ass beat for stuff that I did. When I was growing up, corporal punishment was the norm, not just in the home, but in schools. Parents signing permission slips for, you can either get it here or we can tell your parents and you can get it at home. That's the era that I grew up in. I didn't feel any of that. It's okay to feel. You're gonna hurt. You're gonna know sadness. You're gonna feel pain, and that's all right. It's a part of the process. It's a part of being human. Don't be afraid to be human. I taught myself how to not be human. So every day, again, a part of my rehabilitation, a part of my overcoming my addiction is committing to being human, because there's a huge part of me that's not. It has never gone away, and it probably never will. It's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's screwed up, but I manage it. And I allow my humanity to come out and deal with you and say and talk about stuff like this. So that's what I tell them to do. Be human. That's the best advice I could give that 7-year-old. Be human.
And I can just relate to that briefly, because we keep telling the same story, and it's definitely similar to everyone else on the stage, but we just are a reflection of each other's narrative in so many ways. Like 9-year-old Jesse did the self-sacrificial thing, and I understand why you would interpret the way that I describe it as if it was a bad thing. It wasn't. It was just built upon the wrong understanding of what self-sacrifice truly means. I was protecting somebody else, but I was willing to absorb the hate and internalize it in the process. And I would tell my younger self, don't internalize the hate, embrace it, right? Embrace it and go with it. And then that sort of trauma that became PTSD could have been redirected into post-traumatic growth, where it could have been able to cope and to deal with it. And no kid is guilty for being victimized like that. The problem is when you allow yourself to continue to perpetuate the victim narrative far into the future, because it's still the kid driving. So Eunice was 9-year-old Jesse. And all he wanted was loved, and he wanted attention, and he wanted somebody to intervene and to tell him to stop, because he was acting out, because he wanted people to notice and to show him that love was real, that there was a thing called love.
I got a new perspective of Eunice.
Excuse me?
I got a new perspective of Eunice.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank
And
you.
to add on to that, something that he just said, no child is equipped to deal with the sort of trauma that we're talking about. And I'd let him know that he's forgiven. Because that was something else that I took on. I did something wrong. I'm wrong. And out of that, what was born was something is wrong with me. As a person, I am wrong. I am broken. And then I started to build walls to hide that brokenness. I can't let anybody see that I'm broken. I can't let anybody see something is wrong with me. I can't let anybody see something other than perfection. It's hard as fuck to be perfect.
Okay. Yep. Sorry.
But I tried to make a career out of it.
Yes, indeed. And failed miserably.
Yeah, yeah. Here.
So thank you for sharing your amazing past and your stories. I'm curious, looking ahead in the future, is there one thing that excites you, and is there one thing that scares you? Something like that.
Okay, I'll go. I'm really excited that this is sounds really trite, but I mean, I think it's really exciting to me that I'm sitting with two men on the stage who are being totally vulnerable. I think that's really amazing, and I think as women, I think we also have a role to play in supporting the men in our lives to be vulnerable, and to show them that it is attractive and it is, it's incredibly sexy, and I just want you guys to know that. I think it's fucking awesome. What was the other part of your question?
One thing that scares you.
One thing that scares me. This is really personal, but since we're here sharing very personal things, so it scares me that I'll never experience having children, and it scares me that I'll never know what it's like the physical feeling of having a child in my belly, and I'll die never knowing that. I won't ever know that, and that's really scary. But the flip side of that, going back to the excitement part, is the possibility that I can experience what it means to have a child in a different way, and I can foster a child who is, coming from horrible circumstances in life, and that child won't only be me taking care of it, but it changing my life, and that's something that I think about a lot, and yeah, that's something that I'm excited about.
Cool.
Something that excites me and something that scares me. I've got a young son who is 2.5 years old. Eldridge Emmanuel Jackson IV. And it excites me that I am a part of the responsibility with my wife, Holly, to raise him and guide him and shape and mold as best we can what it looks like to be a responsible, a compassionate, loving human being. And it scares me that I cannot control him and the things that he will experience in life and what life will present to him, especially as a young black male in this society. I'm going to say it, race is an issue in this society. And it scares me that I have to teach him to, I believe I have to teach him to present himself as not a threat, so that he don't get his brains blown out. And I can't control that. It scares the shit out of me.
Now, I actually haven't introduced Ashanti yet, although right now I'm just feeling like hearing from you specifically in this topic, because I know you do work around this with young men. So do you have anything you want to add? Maybe introduce yourself now? You can pull the chair over with Eldra. Yeah.
Welcome.
Hey, man, thank you. Wow. So I don't think I expected that that question. Wow. So my name is Ashanti. I'm from Oakland. I was raised by a single mother. Wow. So I'm fully present right now. I think in the first half, when a part of the story was told, my mind had taken me out because I wasn't ready for it. And this time I happened to be just totally like present, so I was hearing it. And so I'm sitting here with some fear. So I'm excited to do this activity with you all. I came here prepared to be on, you know? Like, do my thing, you know what I'm saying? Like, hold on, look at it. Hold on. See, it's real right now. This is not even professional. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know? Man. And so I am... And my mom did the best she could, you know. My father died 3 months before I was born. There wasn't a plan that she was going to do it by herself. And that's what happened. And my mom did the best. I think not having a father around, I think that father wound is so really huge in me. And the work I do with young men every day, and the work I do in Ever Forward, and the work we do with these masks, and the work that I get to give people the experience to think about is like, what's a part of myself that I show the world, and what is my mask? What is the part behind the mask? And how the mask is a part of us. And I don't tell people that masks are bad. I think masks are for protection. They're for getting along, for fitting in, for sometimes needing to stay alive, to not get your brains blown out. Because I'm a smart man and I got a smart mouth, and I'm dealing with a person with a badge and a gun. I gotta pretend like I'm not too smart. Can't have too much mouth. Gotta pretend like I'm lower than, less than. I don't have my rights. And when I was 18, I didn't have to feel that way. When I was 17, growing up here in Oakland, graduating from high school, I knew my rights and I could speak my mind, but they weren't killing us. So now, whether I'm in Starbucks or I'm at a cafe and I see you want to walk in the door, like I'm afraid. I'm afraid. The work we do with young men around the Bay Area and the work we get to do around the world is giving young men a space to deal with some of that social, emotional stuff that comes up, giving them some tools and navigate it so that they don't explode on the wrong person for the wrong thing, so they don't let the things that are dealing with the sadness and the fear and the pain and the trauma, let it come out in a way that causes them to give pain and trauma to others? How do we help them learn how to talk about it so we can like process it through it and figure out how can we support you? Not trying to fix you, but just how do we help you work through it so it doesn't turn into something else? And so I sat there and I heard my brother speaking his story, and it just it resonated with me big time. And I've been thinking about this story and figuring out my own self. And, I was going to tell you the story about when I was 17 and my mom got in this battle with her husband. And then I went and got a gun. And then I held off. I was about to go to this place. I was going to tell you that story because I felt like that was one that you could handle, that I could handle. I was ready. Because as a professional speaker, you don't get on stage and tell the news story because you need to practice it. Because you got to take control. You can't like get up there and lose composure. And then I sat there and I was like, what? What's going on? What's going on? And I can't even tell that story. And so remembering 8 years old coming home from this camp. I was raised by a single mother. We didn't go camping much. But she found this camp and got to go to this camp. When I came home, my life was transformed by what happened at this camp. Like as I came back to my house, I wasn't that little boy anymore. There was something else. There was something else. And as I'm standing in the bathroom crying, as the oldest male in my house, as the big brother, having to take care of my brothers and sisters, and my mom saying, "What's wrong?" I'm like, nothing. Because how do you tell? Her that something like that happened to you? How do you tell her? No, you can't, Shanti. You got to take care of your brothers and sisters. You got to get out there and help make dinner and help them with their homework and help them do their stuff and help them clean their room. Like, you are responsible. You're the oldest. You're the man of the house. The man of the house can't let things like that happen. And so it just got bottled up. And it wasn't until I began to do this work 2 years ago with these masks that a man in one of the circles spoke about what happened to him. And I was like, why? All night, that man was in my mind. He was just resonating with me, his story. I was like, why is that story just like sticking with me? Why is this story sticking with me? And it was like maybe 2 days later. And then it was like, oh, wow. Like somehow I was able to like having this role in my house to be in charge of everything. I had to like stuff it. And I stuffed it so far. And so I sat here today, it's just like, wow. The work that we get to do with young men, when I give them that space and I tell them, I haven't really gotten to the place where I can even tell the story. I'm telling the story without telling the story because it's not ready. I won't be able to talk. But I do know that it is time. I do know that that there's young people all over who is trying to navigate it by themselves and who's trying to live in this world. And our young men are in crisis. 94% of people who are in prison are men. And I don't think it's because men are bad. I think because we taught men when they were boys that they're not supposed to feel. They can't show emotion. That's not man enough. Suck it up. And then we wonder why they become adults who can't feel, who are emotionally disconnected, because we trained them that way. Our society's trained them that way. So movies and videos and music, athletes. It's okay if you win a championship to cry, but you can't just cry because you struck out. Like there's certain times it's okay, but other times no. And so I'm glad to be here. I think I needed this. I don't think you knew. I thought I was coming here to give. Yeah. And I'm so glad to have received. And
Yeah, thank you, Vishant.
yeah,
Appreciate
thank
that
you.
a lot.
Thank you.
Really feeling your words and voice.
I'm feeling it too.
So let's,
Yeah.
pause and continue the dialogue and hear what's, how this is impacting you guys. Jesse.
Eldra and Jesse, when I hear your stories, it really resonates with mine. But the titles that I've worn have been socially acceptable: United States Marine, Marine Infantry, correctional officer. Like somehow that there's that way that I got to then give my pain to others. That's socially acceptable. So I'm curious, Eldra, your experience, and Jesse, your experience of when behind bars, the people who were in charge of you, witnessing their pain, what that was like. I'm trying to bring the voice in of that I'm not different than you. However, society can hand out titles. Yeah, I don't really have a better way to articulate that.
I'll speak to
Thank you.
what I felt you say.
All right.
For a decade and a half, maybe, of my incarceration, I politicized my incarceration, and it was the government, it was Whitey, it was the pigs, and a host of other identifications that I projected on them, and they were my enemy. And that was the energy that I carried, so that's what I got back. And I saw some gruesome stuff. I experienced some gruesome stuff. And when I got to a place where I was ready to shift and the transformation inside of me was authentic, my energy shifted. And people who wore green, because that's what prison guards wear in California, their color is green. People who wore green escorted me out of prison. They did everything in their power to raise their hand and let it be known, this dude needs to return to society. So when I shifted, it shifted everything around. It shifted my whole experience. And these were the same people. These were the same ghouls, the same goons, the same thugs, but they were like, I'm feeling you. And they walked me right out of prison. And I had a horrendous jacket.
How does that feel to hear that?
I mean, I had the same thing when I was a correctional officer. It was the them. It was the colored folk. It was the thug. It was the my enemy. And boy, did I receive that back. So I'm so grateful that you and I got to meet outside of those walls.
And I will say, that there needs to be a structural conversation about that too, because I was in the federal system, and it's not unlike the California state system, but it is exaggerated because the way that the federal system has developed with the growth of the number of inmates that are being detained in our society. We now have 2 million people between prisoners and people that are on probation or parole, which if you really break down the demographic, and 94% of them are men, and most of them are between the ages of 18 and 32. And then you take out for that variable all of the youth that cannot go to prison and all of the elderly that have no reason to commit a crime. You're looking at a large segment of young men in our society that are behind bars or one step away from doing so if they do something like smoke a joint or, turn toward not being able to deal with the traumatic consequences of walking around with a felony. But the real tragedy is that they are replicating the very Stanford prisoner experiment that we already know doesn't work, because they build these institutions on tops of mountains in small towns predominantly populated by working class white folk. And so because of the demographical shift when you get inside of a prison, And you have the majority of those guards that are localized, that are working there, and typically it is in the most, how do you say?
Backwater.
Of communities. You get the correctional officer that comes and he embodies the us versus them, but they're in a position of power and control, but you see that they hate the inmate sometimes because the inmate is more liberated than they are. And they resent them for that, not just the race, but the fact that even inside of a cell, one can elevate to a level that they don't have the capacity nor the ability to do because they have numbed themselves. And they have become part of a consumption-driven machine that makes them watch football on Sundays, get drunk on beer, and wake up with little sleep and go to work on Monday without being able to sleep beside a wife and being at 325 pounds and not feeling good about it, not carrying it well, and being able to feel miserable and go in and vent their frustration. But my situation in prison allowed me to really overcome that. And it wasn't just because I was Caucasian and could relate with the Caucasian guards, because I was enemy number one. I was worse than the worst of the blacks because I was a fucking terrorist. And these guys were veterans, because that's really what it's become, is it's become a job security position for what the hell do we do with all the people that are coming back from Iraq and are one step away from becoming terrorists against the government at home. And it's not just the top-down interplay, but that's the structural environment through which this experience is withheld. Now, how in the hell are you going to go back to society unless you can really, like, understand those dynamics, which prisoners do, but then overcome them? Because you go out to a society that does the same thing because you have a felony, and that means you're not part of our democracy, and you're definitely unemployable at anything other than if you create your own avenue. And the people that create their own avenues are those that can address the consciousness at a different level inside a prison, because it's not just black versus white, it's us versus them. And then internal to the inmate population, they have it pitted black versus white, which is only representative of where we're going as a society right now, right? So the same structural grievances that white inmates suffer from might be unique. And there is certainly a sense of white privilege that they typically don't identify, but we are disintegrating as a society to the point where this has nothing to do with color anymore. It's just suffering as a consequence of trying to maintain a system that just doesn't work any longer. And prison is a total embodiment of what's going on in our society at large. So it's that polarization, but it's the environment is created, it's designed to produce that effect. It's not some conspiracy from those on top that want to oppress. It's because those that make decisions in our country have never walked on our sidewalks. They don't even touch ground in our cities anymore. They show up for photo ops, you know, and I support this cause because I want to get votes, but they fly around in private jets. They don't do it on purpose. It's just that they don't understand, right? And so that's really what it's about. For me, interacting with the guards in prison was really cool when I would watch like an inmate, because I didn't interact because I was an observer, because I was like cooperating, but I wasn't like a snitch. I was like stopping Americans overseas that had joined ISIS from like killing us at home. So I had to lay low, and I would watch as inmates that were from like inner city, uber bright kids would have been like fucking just amazing people. There's just fundamentally fascinating, particularly minority youth in prison that had they only grown under different circumstances would be the engineers and the scientists that could take us to the next level. And it's a tragedy to watch that. But one thing that you realize real quick is you can see the moment when an inmate has changed and is starting to go in a different direction. There's very few. And it's oftentimes when you see them like communicating with the correctional officer on the side, and you see them having a human conversation that's mutually benefiting both of them, and then you realize that that inmate has learned how to overcome the boundary and still exist and have a sense of existence by being able to engage even the most precarious and difficult of situations. And I think that that's really where we're at as a society right now, where we need more of those inmates to, even though they are being oppressed, and the oppression is very real, we need them to overcome that with a level of consciousness that's accelerated so we as a community and a collective can get to that stage as well.
Mark.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. It's really, really impactful and very, very touching and transformative. I know you all do amazing work in the world, as far as I can tell from hearing your stories and also from reading your bios. And I'm really, really curious about what your individual visions are in terms of what needs to be done, and not so much just universally, but like what you individually think needs to be done and what you're individually focusing on contributing or transforming. Because I feel like, we can't change everything individually, but we can all take a segment of society where we feel most passionate and contribute. So I'm really curious what those are for each one of you, and also, like where you think the work needs to happen.
Mark, can I ask you to maybe share if that question, answer that for yourself also first?
Cool.
Well, yeah, since I'm here and I'm listening to all y'all, I feel that the inner work is really, really important. And that's what I'm also hearing from most of you up there. So I feel like we're, in community here in that regard. Just taking a moment here. Yeah, I've kind of just done what's easy for me, which was to be with my emotional experience and to really explore that. And I had some spiritual experiences that were really profound for me. So that's the direction I went, was to kind of find my spiritual path. And also coupled with that, I realized my inner life needed to transform. So I've explored yoga and the Eastern arts. I'm Asian, so naturally. Plus I was in Santa Cruz, so I took a lot of psychedelics on top of that. And all those things combined, me into who I am now, just kind of like a victim of my circumstances in a way. So that's what I do in shiny little Santa Cruz and Los Gatos over there. But I'm also really, really especially touched by, I grew up in the city though. I grew up in San Francisco. I was in the mix. I went to public school, I saw the craziness and the intensity. And I didn't know what I was dealing with until I started doing my healing work. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh, I get what's going on. I understand what's happening now more. But I haven't really made the bridge yet to come back and to contribute on that ground level where I think it really needs to happen. So I really feel like we need to look at where, a lot of us are very privileged. We're doing amazing work, and there's so many places we need to reach into all the different corners of society. I think that work needs to be extended into those areas. So that's my thought. I'm not quite doing it yet.
Thank you. Yes, I feel like you are. Thank you so much.
So there's obviously a thing where you want to turn it internally. If we could push a button or fix everybody's brains to suddenly oh, I'm actually fine. That seems ideal. But it's really hard to do that for someone else. And so advocating this giant change of everybody suddenly doing their own internal journey seems very hard to accomplish. So setting that whole thing aside, which probably you read books or something, I don't know. But one thing that I often have a feeling of this seems damaging in society is narrative around that you should feel bad about things. And one big culprit of this, which I'm going to say with a lot of hedging, this is not entirely true, is the Me Too movement, which is very beneficial in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this is not a very important issue that needs to be addressed. But the atmosphere around this is one of, if something bad happened to you, then it's extremely wrong. And there's no room inside of that to say, did it actually affect you, right? If it did actually affect you, we should talk about that, right? And then we should make changes. But so much in society, I see this narrative, this pushing narrative that if any sort of sexual assault happened to you, you automatically must feel traumatized. And if you're not feeling traumatized, then something's wrong. And that seems like such a horrific mentality to me. Because if somebody goes through something like that and could have felt better by just processing the pain, society is actively putting them into the trap of self-punishment, of saying, I'm a victim and I'm suffering. And sometimes that's necessary, don't get me wrong, especially if you need to reset norms. So if this was a normal thing for you. But in a lot of cases, it's an unnecessary thing to do, and it really bothers me.
Nice, thank you.
Okay, I'll go. So as I mentioned before, I have a book that I published in the fall, and it's a guide to help. It's tailored for people who have a cancer diagnosis, but it really is a tool to help people tell their story, explore grief and trauma, and to find personal transformation out of that. And so I've been working on that, and then simultaneously, I also have a cannabis company that I founded with my mother, who was a UC Berkeley scientist. It's called Cosmic View. And it's like an interesting dovetailing because we're very medicinal focused, and a lot of what we do focus on is empowering people to take control of their health. And so it's just such a strange path that my life has. I'm like, how the hell did I get here? But I'm here. So what I really focus on right now, me and my mother focus on, is both supporting people physically with plant medicine, but also because of, everything that I've been through, it's really, I feel so blessed that I'm able to meet people where they are and just listen to what they're going through and to encourage them to just be okay with wherever they are in terms of, whatever, emotional trauma or physical health or whatever. It's been such an honor to be able to work with people who are sick and to just be present with them. And so that's kind of what I'm focused on right now, is just presence. And I have these, my life experience and this plan as a tool. And in the background of that, I am, of course, totally aware of, the wrongs that are tied to this plant, and the social equity movement in the cannabis industry. Oakland has a really strong ethos around that, and that's something that I would, as I am able to take a breath, I would really like to focus on that more. And the way I have structured my company and even seeking fundraising, I've been very transparent about the fact that this isn't a company for me to get rich off of. It's a company for me to help people and to lift up the people who work with me. So yeah, we are a feminist. I call us a feminist enterprise, and I try to embody our values. And just, it's hard, and it's very hard being any sort of an entrepreneur. It's really hard being an entrepreneur in an unknown, a brand new industry. But I'm trying to approach it in a very mindful way and with a lot of humility, which there's a lot of opportunity for that with tons of money coming in, and it's just crazy out there. So anyway, if anybody has any questions about that afterward, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But so that's what I'm doing these days.
Yeah. Anybody else want to respond?
What am I doing? What is my part? I'm trying to save the world. Period, point blank. We got this saying, with Inside Circle, one circle at a time. We're saving lives one circle at a time. And, to talk about, everybody doing their own internal work, that's a dream. But shit, a lot of the good stuff that we have now happened because somebody dreamed and then they chased it. I'm working with Inside Circle Foundation. I'm the co-executive director. I'm working with an organization called YEGA, Youth Empowerment and Goals Association. I'm working with an organization called Shoulder to Shoulder that pairs fatherless young men in the community with upstanding men in the community. Some kind of way they let me in. And what we seek to do in all of those circles is to provide choices. Let people know in those circles that you do have a choice. I am someone who has a choice. I don't have to react a certain way. that story is not written. I'm the author of my own story. And to give a small breakdown on that, if I kill you, that's something that happened between me and you in my mind. But the truth of the matter is if you're married, I just did something to your wife.
Externalities, yeah.
If you've got kids, I just did something to them. If you and your wife didn't have kids yet, I just snuffed out some lives that will never see the light of day. And all of your extended family, I've just affected them. The judge who has to preside over my trial, because I'm going to get caught, I'm not a good criminal, has to go through seeing once again the worst that humans can do to one another. The district attorney that has to carry this all the way to the end, day and night, resolving to this family that I'm going to get you justice. The jury that's impaneled that has to look at this murder book that's 1,500 pages thick and look at the pictures and look at the descriptions and hear over and over and over and over and over the horror that I brought into the world. The effect that has on their families that they take back, that they're not allowed to talk about, but they're having nightmares about this shit. And on and on. It's a pebble dropping into a pond, and that ripple effect. Now, we're sitting in this circle, and we're saving lives one circle at a time. If I can reach one cat and let him know that he's got a choice, he ain't got to kill Joe Willie because he stepped on his blue suede shoes. That same effect that I just described is going in the opposite direction. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll piggyback off you just one more time. So, I mean, I think that, like, what I do right now is I run an organization called Parallel Networks that seeks to combat hate and violent extremism and the polarization that really lies at the root of it. And I think it's really about that same thing, is that we need a ripple effect, right? Because we are at a crossroads with regard to our future, and a lot of people could not see or fathom the disintegration of what we have come to expect and take for granted, which is essentially whatever you want to call it, liberal world order or whatever, whether or not that term is actually realized or not. We do see that polarization is tearing us asunder domestically in the same way that it's tearing our communities asunder, and has been for some long time. But now we're seeing that in the age of interconnectivity, where we're all connected on Facebook by 3.5 degrees, you would think that the social media they promised would democratize us and put us in contact with other opinions would be creating these flourishing societies, and it's actually tearing us apart. Making us more anxiety prone, it's making us more narcissistic, it's making us less connected to depth, right? Cat videos over like conversations like these without the attention span to pay attention long enough to a conversation like these, and that's going to hamper and prevent us from going forward. But where I live in the now is a lot drawn off of the statement that I like from the poet Rumi, mostly because he wasn't a literalist, but also because I live it. And he says that the wound is the place where the light enters you. And I think that collectively and individually, because I like this idea that individually we can spread something that is a movement that's like a virus on an each one teach one type approach, because every single narrative in here, I'm sure all of you are playing your own lives in parallel to the lives that we are discussing here, with very different backgrounds, but so many similarities along the way. And I think we're all in this struggle because everybody here wouldn't be here if they weren't on some sort of quest and some sort of search. But if the wound is the place where the light enters you, then it's not sufficient for us to finalize our search. It's to understand that when you are searching for something outside of yourself, you will continue to fail. But as soon as you turn internal and find yourself, the craziest thing about it is that the stuff outside of you starts to ripple, and the reverberation. So those externalities that you and we're largely unaware of, it's a good word today that plants the root that you don't know what kind of tree it's going to grow tomorrow. And I think that what we need to do as a society is to have these conversations, because these individual narratives are true for you and every individual in this room, but we're all suffering from the same consequences of what could be considered a global case of PTSD. We're tired. Things are changing. We're weary. But we take for granted the fact that we could wake up like we did one day when the subprime mortgage crises hit, and say, holy shit, capitalism is about to die, right? And that's just an economic analogy. When you look at the intersection of economics and politics and science and technology, and you look at it all, like, we have to ask ourselves a question. It's like, is it really all worth it, or do we need a total paradigm shift? And if we're going to have a paradigm shift, we can't do it on our own. So I get hope in the idea that in addressing the micro, you can manifest things that can address the macro. So every individual on this stage took a risk to change and to change themselves, and then the manifestation of that becomes more about, like, wow, it manifests itself in ways that are social too, right? And so that's that ripple effect. And so we all just leave from here and go change the world and get 20 more people to do it too. We're on our way, you know, and that's what it's about. Spaces like this where the synchronicity of why do people at an orchestra clap and everybody beats in the same tune, because the power of the art that inspired the reaction already put them in that level of rhythm that is coincident to the rhythm of the universe or nature or whatever we need to be in tune to. And I think we need to get on that rhythm, because there are reverberations, and we might be different in so many ways, but if we can all just get upon that synchronized clap, then we can have true change. But we oftentimes, right now, we're divided left and right, and most of us fall on one side of the spectrum and hate the other without knowing any of the nuanced positions and worldviews that they hold. And if you can't understand that you can't address a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it, then you might be part of the problem and not even realize it. And so I think that that's what we come to realize is, like, authenticity is difficult. It's easy to go around and do yoga and shit, right? You drink tea, you know, but then you get the phenomenon where you realize it's all bullshit when everybody has to pay $120 for yoga pants that used to just cost $6 because nobody wanted them. And that's kind of fucked up, right? And that's the world we live in. So we don't have to tear it down, right? We just got to understand that, like, at the end of the day, humans inhabit it, and we're becoming less and less human as a consequence of all those moving parts. So we could just be human to each other and smile a lot and share ourselves and tell other people, listen, it's okay to talk about what's going on inside, then we get synchronicity. And we're all interconnected because we're all online, but if we can just do a little bit more offline work too, I think that would help. So that's basically what we try to do.
Thank you. Should we do one more question and then we'll go into Ashanti's experience?
Hi, I'm Odelia. Thanks so much for all of your stories. Especially just like real quick before I ask my question, I want to say thank you to the gentleman for like naming race. I think it's really important to like introduce like how that really like shapes doing this kind of internal work. And also like realizing in this kind of work, like you could be doing great work while also, you know, still shaping and healing from your own story, as you mentioned, like you're still working through telling that story, and I'm doing the same too. And also be remiss if I didn't say that, you know, definitely Sister Tarana Burke's work on Me Too, I think often gets appropriated and misunderstood. So I definitely encourage everyone to like look up like her like narrative on that around Me Too. My question is thinking about like my own like trajectory of like healing and what that looks like, you know, thinking about what you just said about the yoga pants, so true. What is that critical difference for you all in getting into specificities of the difference between just the mantra of like suffering is good, like suffering will get you someplace, and the actual like work of embodying that and like letting it transform you? Like where do you see that critical difference, and like where did you see that shift in your life of just like thinking and saying it to like living it out every day so it doesn't just become another $125 yoga pants?
This feels like an ongoing cycle to me. This is not like a state that you get to and then hold on to forever. Because like there's the thing where like something happens and you're doing it, and then suddenly your brain goes, I'm doing it, and then like it leaves an imprint of the person that you are that was doing it. And then that imprint is the thing that you hold on to. And like no matter how far I get down the road, this happens all the time, where like I will be embodying something incredible and beautiful, and then I'll realize I'm doing it, and I'm like, I'm the one embodying something incredible and beautiful. Why don't I like go sit on a panel, talk about it? And it's like, what am I
I doing? Like, I have nothing to teach, really. It's like such a funny little game. Like I'm always like running up behind myself and like thinking that I know. Because like the knowing is the holding. Like you are holding this concept and you're identifying with it. And it's like this action that we constantly do. And that's like what it means to have a thought or like a sense of identity. And so like sometimes this applies to larger or smaller scales or whatever, but it's always happening. It's like the way that we function on a concrete level. But it's always those little moments in between of like, like that's where it is.
Nice.
I hear that a lot. Like people are like, how are you just not miserable? How do you, like, what's the difference between like honoring grief and just like being sad all the time? And I don't know. I think one of my really good friends one time said to me, like I had a really bad day, and she said, you know what, Nicole, just give yourself permission to feel like shit for a day. Give yourself a number of days. Give yourself 2 days. And just really be present with that. And that's what I do. And I mean, I think it of course, it's not like after the 48 hours, I'm like, I'm done. But it's like, I don't know. I almost feel like that's kind of a myth that just because you allow suffering, that you have to like sort of like control it so that you're not miserable all the time. I don't know. Just in my experience, I've really found that when I give myself permission to be sad or to mourn or to feel grief that I'm feeling, that it just passes because I've given myself permission to actually be present with that. So I don't know. That's just my experience. It's exhausting to be sad all the time.
Yeah, like at some point, it's like you've soaked in what you needed to soak in. You've like, you know, and I don't know, you know, and then it passes. You go to sleep and you wake up the next morning and you're like, okay, it's a new day. And, you know, I had this monastic say to me once, she said, everything is always moving. And it's so true. You know, I think if you can remember that everything's always moving. Sadness is always, you know, impermanence, right? And so yeah, that's just kind of been my experience.
Cool. My experience with that is the way that we teach, the processes that we do, we have a jargon, all these different, you know, organizations, groups, functions, whatever, have their own jargon, and we speak to poison and medicine. And my poison is right there festering in my wound. And that's how I react. When I'm reactionary, I'm reacting out of that space of poison. And my medicine is lying right there next to it. It goes back into that choice. And my poison is where I talked about shutting down, not having any feelings, not having any compassion, cutting off that piece of humanity. The reality of my medicine is my compassion, my empathy. When he was sitting here talking about what he was talking about, 8 years old, I was right there with him. I could feel that shit. I was up here crying and mourning for that 8-year-old boy. That's my medicine. So that's how it comes about for me in the world. Because my medicine, my poison, it's not going anywhere, because that wound's not going anywhere. I just seek more often, I'm not always successful, to tap into the medicine and bring that into the world, as opposed to letting the poison ooze out into the world.
And that is so beautiful, because that is like the power of, like, when we can be truly vulnerable and connect with another human where they are at points of vulnerability, that is exactly the medicine. And I think that's why I'm drawn to this work, is I just, you know, that's what it's all about. Like, that's amazing.
Thank you, guys. Awesome.